Good? Main camera, recording.
Recording video.
And new event.
Sweet class.
Camera recording.
We're good to start.
Am I in the shot?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry, never mind. Hi everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of season 3 of Knights at the Round Table. Today we are discussing the third book in the Elenium series, The Sapphire Rose by David Eddings. And I am sitting here today with Rob Olsen. I'm just going to jump right into general impressions of the book.
General impressions of the book. Okay, well, I mean, as we discussed last time we reviewed a David Eddings book, which was even in the same series.
Yeah, this is the final of the series.
The second trilogy, yes?
What?
Was it?
No?
Yes.
The Ruby Knight,
Anyway, regardless,
Ruby Knight.
It's in the same series.
Yeah.
I greatly enjoyed this series. I greatly enjoy the author. Yeah. Good stuff all around.
Yeah, I have to agree. I really love this series a lot. That isn't to say that there aren't a number of issues with the series, but I do love it. And most of that love comes from nostalgia, I think, not because the series is brilliant by any measure.
I wouldn't call it brilliant.
But it's good.
But I would call it very enjoyable.
Yeah, extremely enjoyable. It's an excellent read. Every time.
They are well-paced books. I mean, they're not the kind of books where you're going to be sitting on the edge of your seat being like, oh my god, something cool's about to happen. But at the same time...
When I was 12, yes.
Well, yeah. But you are constantly reading at a fairly comfortable pace, and you'll just, go through this in,
like 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easily written, it's easy to understand. Although, what struck me really hard reading it this time around with a slightly more critical eye than I have in the past is, holy mackerel, does it take a number of cues from Lord of the Rings. Yeah, well, see, Gerwig is definitely Gollum, right up to the tumble over the edge of a cliff, except Gollum falls into Mount Doom and therefore destroys the ring.
Yeah.
Gerwig just, tumbles over, and then the goddess brings up the Elenium, the Sapphire Rose, or Blue Rose as it's called in the book, or calls itself. Ajash is Sauron seeking the One Ring, except in this instance he's seeking the Blue Rose, and he's seeking it for the same reason, so that he can become whole again and then take over the world.
Apparently his followers have a lot more dirty sex, though, than Tolkien.
Yes, that's true. Their rights are quite...
When he is converting you to his religion, he does it with an awful lot of...
gory orgies.
Yes.
Is sort of the way I would describe that.
If you're into that, all hail Azash.
Azash?
Yes. If you're not, though, you might want to go for the very charismatic young child goddess Ephriel, yeah, who wins over even the steeliest of hearts of the church knights, which is
Sparhawk.
Yeah. Not sure whether he's the steeliest.
Actually, no, you're right. Well, of the church knights, I think he would be.
He's not even the most badass.
No, he's not. I would give that to Olaf.
Or Bevier.
But Bevier's a little too...
Everybody is afraid of that axe.
Yeah.
It's not so much an axe, but a polearm that he carries like an axe. He just beheads people. Yeah,
isn't it Olaf who does all the beheading?
Olaf also does beheading.
Olaf quite enjoys the beheading.
But whenever they want to make a point, it's Bevier who walks over and is just like, lop!
Really?
Yeah.
Because I remember it was Olaf who beheaded Baron Harapin.
Yeah.
And also the church guard at the gate of the city. Yeah, and also the majority of...
Once they got into the city, when they were going into the hierarchy chamber.
Oh, that's true.
It was Bevier who walked forward and was like, allow me, Sir Sparhawk. Walks over, blah, 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 blah. And he's very flowery with it, with the language, too. He's like the gentlemanly church knight. He walks over, he's like, blah, 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 but kindly whatever. And it's like, oh, that is disappointing.
Yeah. This would make for an excellent miniseries.
It would. A lot of the writing is actually would transition very well to cinematics.
Yes, I agree,
Yeah.
I agree. And the characters are also absolutely delightful. I love Kelton the man-child. And I love that Sparhawk is also quite childish, sometimes extremely petty. And I love Sapphire.
Yeah.
And I also, although I had issues with her, loved Elana a lot.
Yeah.
I appreciated the way he worked her strengths, which weren't physical in the way that I would often imagine a badass woman to be, but she held her own in some very hostile territory. And
I also liked her explanation of growing up once Sparhawk was into his exile.
Was exiled.
She was basically explaining to him, how she came to be an adult. And she was like, listen, my knight protector was exiled. I had no friends in court.
Any that I did make were disappeared.
Yeah, I was a young queen to be, so basically I had to be tough. And,
and also sneaky and underhanded
sneaky.
and manipulative.
Yeah.
Which, she excels at, the political game. And I appreciate that about her, even though in most regards she's sort of your very typical princess character.
I mean, she was a character that needed to be rescued, but not because she inherently needed to be rescued, because she was done in by trickery and evil. Which is not the same thing as being frail and being like, oh my god.
Unable. Yes, I agree. Which is why I did have some issues with the almost literal woman in the refrigerator that Elana became, or was at the start of this novel and most of the way through the series, actually. But it was done for the right reasons. It wasn't. It wasn't gratuitous, is what I'm saying. It wasn't unnecessary. It made sense for it to be that way.
It wasn't taking out a weak female character. It was the bad guys having to sidetrack a strong female character.
Yeah.
So.
Which I appreciated very much. So even though she wasn't like a sword-wielding badass like many of the women I like to read are, she was still a really strong character, and I appreciated it.
You have to imagine, though, as an adult, now that Sparhawk is back in her life again, you have to imagine that she will eventually become a badass sword-wielding queen. With him around, you can imagine that...
No, I disagree.
I think
disagree.
She's going to get the sword lessons,
I disagree. I think that the gender division in this book was all the way through. Like, there wasn't a single sword-wielding badass, except for that one, or I might be thinking of the Malorian. But I think she's mentioned at the end of the Sapphire Rose. I can't remember. I read it a week ago.
There was the giantess.
That's her. Yeah, the half giantess.
Myrtai?
Yeah, Myrtai. That's her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but you gotta imagine, looking into the future, that Elana's, more comfortable on her throne, everything's settled, she's gonna pick up a sword eventually. Whether it's Sparhawk or Myrtai who teaches her, she will pick up a weapon eventually.
She seems like the sort of character that might, but the way that the story went and most of the women were in the story, I would disagree. But then again, you don't have to be sword-wielding to be a badass. Yeah. Lenda.
I'm like, yes, you do.
Yes, you do. And it has to be like a massive claymore. No, Lenda, for example, not a proficient swordsman, exceptional politician.
It's true.
Yeah, and he was pretty badass, actually. And very nonchalant about the brains splattered everywhere. He was walking through the palace at the beginning of the book. I did appreciate those descriptions too, I have to say. When, for example, Ulath very thoughtfully scraped the brains off the steps for Sapphire when she was coming up. Oh, I had another point about the structure of the story, or at least at the beginning in the prologue, you have an explanation of how the Elenes came displaced the Styrics, and sort of somewhere in the east the two cultures melded and become the Zemoks. I'm like, this is very much the invasion theory for Europe. And that theory is basically that the shining Aryan peoples rushed in from the Russian steppes and displaced all of the cultures that were presently in Europe in the early Bronze Age. And reading that, I'm like, that's it, exactly. He essentially just described that. Exactly. I don't ascribe to that theory, by the way. You had a point.
Yeah, I have many points. No, one of the things you were mentioning is, and this sort of differentiates this book from a lot of other books, all of the fighty characters, a bunch of, church knights, they could have been written extremely seriously, but they all have little, smart-ass and witty commentary when they're killing people, about to kill people, just have killed people. And it's one of the things that draws you into the characters, because sometimes the warrior characters can be a little bit boring and not always likable, but all of these guys are likable. Sort
of the kind of paladin character that church knights could be.
Could be, yeah.
A really dull, no, we do good and only good, but these people are like, yeah, we'll consort with thieves if it gets the job done. And yes, they were. All of them, without exception, were incredible smartasses.
Even a lot of the high churchmen, too.
Yeah.
Were conniving individuals, they're like...
Well, that's actually not a surprise. Anyone involved in politics would usually be written as a conniving sort of character.
But usually, in movies, you'll see a whole bunch of, fairly, static churchmen, and then you'll have one evil churchman who's, sneaky ass. All of these guys are sneaky for the most part. Mm. Or, they're sort of mentioning on the side the one guy that isn't, that they have to sort of, play good around. But for the most part, they're all sneaky characters, doing stuff like, sending out messages, that, like, oh my god, my king, whatever, the church needs you, edict of the church, and then saying, oh, if we don't get that motion passed, once the message is already sent, then we can be like, oops, my bad.
Yeah.
Blame it on the page, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true. The world building in this is not so spectacular, but the characters really do make this story. And I love them all, even the bad guys. Like, Talon was an amazing young man who was super snarky and quite gifted, and I really enjoyed that. I think I mentioned before when reviewing the first and second book that I had... Sparhawk was my first literary crush. Like, he was the first character I ever, literally fell in love with. And it kind of still holds. Broken Nose and all. I really like Spylock.
Spylock.
Sparhawk?
It's not Battlestar Galactica.
That was a weird mash of other characters of similar name.
We should talk about some things that we didn't like about this book.
Yes.
And I'm going to lead off coming from the childhood crush angle. Because once they cure Queen Elena...
Oh, yeah. No, I had issues with this too.
You hear about her childhood crush on her protector, which is fine. I have no problem with that. When you have a knightly protector, it only makes sense in my mind that, a childhood crush might develop. So I was okay with that. What I was not okay with was his reaction to it. Because what they sort of led up to the whole time is he was looking at her, seeing her as the child that he remembered from when she was a kid and he was her protector. So she's going into this being like, I want to marry this, my, hot knight protector. And he's looking at her being like, oh, the child, Elena. And all of a sudden, she starts making, moves towards him and kissing him. And there's a couple times where he's like, I gotta warn you, I'm too old for you. But that's really all the resistance he put up. And then he was like, okay, yeah. So I was like, dude, especially given how good the character development was for most of that, I think Eddings could have had him protest a little bit more than just one or two, by the by, I'm too old for you, before automatically going from child in my mind to, let's do this.
He did mention the conflict a little, like right after the day after, I think, she was cured. But not nearly enough, you're right. And also the age difference is quite astounding. She's 18 years old when Sparhawk accidentally proposes to her, and he's late 30s, early 40s?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but
twice his...
I'm still not so bothered about the age difference.
Really? Because I am.
No, I mean, you know what? Like, if he initiated it, okay, fine. But if she initiates it, okay, that's not such a big deal. So long as the love's there, I don't care about the age. It's just, I didn't like the going from child to fiance in this place of 4 pages.
Yeah,
I was
that's true. It was quite. He could have done more with that conflict. I think it would have been much more engaging had he.
It's important to note they never made it creepy though. It didn't read as
that's
creepy.
True. It didn't read as creepy.
It did read as
rushed.
As the author made a mistake here, which, given that most of the book flowed so well, that was kind of glaring.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember, because I was quite young when I first read this series. And I think by the time I finished the 3rd book, I was 14, maybe? And so, in that instance, I didn't think much of the age difference, because being surrounded by 14-year-old boys, I thought all young men were idiots. And, and so I would naturally gravitate towards older people. Almost all of my crushes, actually, I think, when I was 14 were in their 30s or 40s. So, yeah, when I was reading it, it felt perfectly natural. Now I'm like, I mean, I can understand it, but the age gap did bother me a little, because we see that so much. That way around, too. It's always a really young woman with a much older guy. It's almost never a young man with a much older woman.
See, for me, though, I wouldn't mind seeing that. It doesn't change my point of view on this. But yeah, just the way it... What about other criticisms?
Azash's reaction to Sparhawk. It could have been a better fight. Because Azash was lashing out at everyone except Sparhawk in that last fight. And it bugged me so much, because you have like a god and then you have superpowered human. It could have been a spectacular battle, but it really wasn't. It was just Sparhawk walking forward holding the blue rose.
Yeah, especially to put this in context, this is a god who holds grudges and is not, like we already mentioned, not a caring nurturer type. So back in the book when they were talking about Otha, yeah, his first lackey sort of, whatever, Otha failed him. He failed to get the black rose, blue rose, sorry, sapphire rose, whatever, and so the god's reaction to this failure was, I'm going to let you try to get it one more time, and if you fail me, you will be in undying torment forever. So this is the kind of, guy he is. So the fact that, he sort of, I guess, let Sparhawk off a little easy in this fight was... A little? Yeah, was glaring.
Oh, it could have been a spectacular battle, and I would have loved to have seen it. Yeah, in my mind's eye, I read about it. Same thing. It would have been amazing, but no, it was just basically Sparhawk going.
Did it ever mention, like, where this gem came from? How this gem was created? I don't remember that.
Yes, but it wasn't in this book where they explain where the blue rose came from.
Okay, right.
It was in the prologue of the first book, The Diamond Throne. And it was carved by Gerweg as already a thing of power, and then he trapped the troll gods in.
Right.
Yeah, so that's where it came from.
Because, I mean, on one side, like you're saying, you have this, God, and then you have a super-powered human with this gem, and you're sitting there being like, okay, so this gem gives him enough power to take out a god, And I was thinking, who the hell would make a gem like that? And then, so I've forgotten that part.
That part, yeah. Well, it's been a long time since we even reviewed the first book, and that was 2 seasons ago, so it was in the first season of Knights. I
can barely remember what I had for breakfast, let alone, what I read, a year ago or more.
Yeah, or like 3 years ago, or, yeah. Do you have any other issues with the book that you wanted to take up?
Well, I mean, there was a certain amount of, it always bugs me a little bit when, gods are meddling in a story all the time.
Well,
but
it depends how it's done.
Yeah, but this one, it's a little bit less annoying because it was done in clever ways for the most part. I wasn't a huge fan of this because that was the siege.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mind the siege so much, actually. But that's mostly because I find early warfare fascinating. So, early Iron Age up to the medieval period.
I think what really bugged me was that there was so many religious fanatics. I mean, yes, it's a book involving church knights and, lots of religion, but whenever you get an army that's just like, okay, so we're going to throw a whole bunch of fanatics, and in this case, the Rendors, who were both fanatical and not too bright.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they were throwing these troops, at the wall, trying to overwhelm the wall, and then the Knights of the Church were like, let's just put poison spikes all over the friggin' place. And then the Rendors kept on running into the poison spikes, and I was like, okay, yes, they're fanatical and stupid, but don't they learn eventually?
Yeah, but suicide bombers. It's the medieval equivalent.
Yeah, but he had an whole army of them, and it was just getting a little bit...
Yeah, that's true. I took issue with some of the bad guys, because with the exception of perhaps... Well, the gods doesn't count.
Yeah.
The gods don't count. Oh, grammar. I can grammar. The gods don't really count, but the only really intelligent bad guy was Martell. All the other bad guys were pretty dumb. Ashram was an idiot in the last book, and Otho wasn't terribly bright in this book because his mind had been overrun by Azash, who was a simple god and therefore had simple thoughts. They
claimed that Martell was smart and that he was tactically smart, yet while his troops are smashing their way to the exterior of the fortress, Martell walks through a passageway into the middle of the fort with to have a business meeting with his boss when he could have been funneling troops through that same passageway before the good guys even realized that passageway existed. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. The bad guys in this were daft. They were.
There was a secret tunnel! The moment you find a secret tunnel, jam troops through before anybody notices. Don't wait. Don't go and have a coffee in that tunnel.
Yeah.
Chat about your evil plans.
Where you can be spied upon.
Yeah. Well, the worst part is they weren't even spied upon initially. They went, they had their secret discussion, got caught at it, then came back later and had their secret discussion in front of witnesses. Yeah, so he's not the most brilliant.
Yeah, but he was the most brilliant of the bad guys, and was at least on par with Sparhawk, I think. Sparhawk's plans are not that brilliant. Most of the time he succeeds by sheer dumb luck.
That and good friends.
And good friends.
Some of his friends are sneakier. It's one of these things...
Kuruk was the main reason behind Sparhawk's success, and spoiler alert, the first time I cried over a character death was in this book.
It's important to have a good squire.
Yes, yeah. I was so distraught about his death that I closed the book, put it down, walked into the living room where my mother was, and just stood there crying.
In warfare, you must have a good squire a badass horse, a very sharp blade, some snazzy armor, and some bitchin' uniforms, because you have to look good.
And magic.
Yeah, and,
I want to talk about Farron, actually, very briefly. I love how he is a Disney-fied character. He's basically Maximilian from Tangled. He's a sassy horse. I love Farron.
I always sort of pictured him as, like, the biggest war horse around with a personality of a donkey.
Yeah, yeah. And ugly to boot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, that horse has my heart. I think I like Spellhawk as much for his horse as anything else.
Yeah.
Okay, so, final thoughts on the book before we give it a star rating.
It's a good read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good read. It's fun. The characters are super compelling. I really, really, really enjoy the characters in this. There are lots of times when reading this book, even though sometimes the images it conjures can be quite heavy, the reading is just delightful that you giggle.
I wish I had something nastier to say, but I really don't.
No,
it's good stuff.
Yeah, it's a good read. So, star rating?
Solid 3.
Yeah. I on Goodreads I gave it a 4 because they don't do half stars, and it would otherwise be a 3.5. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, good read. Pick up the series. Honestly, it's a good series.
Yep.
Thank you, David Eddings, for my first ever crush. Okay.
So I think you should pick
What?
This time. Ha-ha!
Okay, I'll pick the book this time.
I'm not to be blamed this time. I got proactive, people. Be proactive. Rob's tip of the day. Snazzy armor. Good friends. Proactive.
Hunter's Moon by O.R. Melling. I haven't read this one, so I'm really looking forward to it, actually.
Never even heard of it.
Oh, really?
No.
I've only heard of it because of our contributors, Jen and Eric. Excellent.
Our coffee suppliers.
Our coffee suppliers, absolutely. So, in 2 weeks we'll be reading the book Hunter's Moon by O.R. Melling. If you have any thoughts about the Sapphire Rose, or indeed the entire Elenium series, feel free to leave them down below. We also have a Goodreads.com book club that I'll leave a link to down below. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks very much. Bye!
Boo.